The voice came first, cold, crisp, and rehearsed. "Sir, this seat is reserved. You'll need to move to the back." The words cut through the cabin like a blade. Polite on the surface, deadly underneath. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned. A white flight attendant towering over a calm, composed black man in seat 1A. Her smile, professional. Her tone, poison. Then came the warning, soft, sharp, and final. "If you don't cooperate, security will remove you." The first-class cabin went silent. You could feel the judgment in the air, the whispers, the stays. To them, he was out of place, an inconvenience, an intruder who didn't belong in their perfect little world. But what they didn't know was that less than an hour ago, that same man had signed a deal worth billions. A deal that made him the new owner of the entire airline. The irony was brutal. They were seconds away from trying to throw their own boss off his plane. Have you ever been judged by people who had no idea they were bowing to power? Before we continue, tell us where you are watching from, and if this story touches you, make sure you subscribe because tomorrow I have saved something extra special for you. The hushed cabin of Apex Air Flight 715 from New York to Los Angeles was a world unto itself, a meticulously engineered sanctuary built at 30,000 feet. It hummed with the quiet confidence of old money and new tech, a place where multi-billion-dollar deals were closed with a soft handshake and a glass of champagne that cost more than a coach ticket. The air smelled of expensive Italian leather and a subtle, woody cologne that seemed to be a prerequisite for entry, a stark contrast to the sterile, recycled air just beyond the curtain. Soft, warm light glowed from recessed fixtures, making the heavy crystal glasses clink with a sound like distant wind chimes, a soundtrack for the elite. Each seat was a private cocoon, a throne of plush cream leather designed to insulate its occupant from the mundane, messy realities of the world below. This wasn't just a flight. It was an experience, an ecosystem of privilege meticulously crafted to reinforce one simple, brutal idea. Some people are simply better than others. In this world, status was the only currency that mattered. And in seat 1A, LeBron Carter was quietly cashing in. Dressed in a tailored suit the color of a moonless midnight, he wasn't just wearing clothes. He was wearing armor, forged in the fires of 1,000 boardrooms. He was 45 years old, but his eyes held a timeless weight, the penetrating gaze of a man who had fought 1,000 silent battles and won every single one. On the sleek tablet resting on his knee, he was reviewing the final lines of a contract worth more than the plane he was sitting on. But his mind wasn't on the numbers. It was drifting back, through the years, to a dusty, underfunded library in Houston. He could still smell the old paper and would polish, could still feel the splintered tabletop under his teenage fingers. It was there, between the pages of borrowed books on physics and finance, that a young boy made a promise to himself. It was a silent, ferocious vow that his mind, not the color of his skin, would be the thing that defined his legacy. This deal, this flight, this very seat, it wasn't just a victory lap. It was the fulfillment of that promise, the closing of a circle that had started a lifetime ago. He allowed himself a small, private smile, a flicker of warmth in his disciplined eyes. He had made it, but he knew better than anyone that in a world that sees your success as a threat, peace is a fragile, temporary illusion, easily shattered by the one thing money can't buy: respect. And the shattering was about to begin. A sharp voice, as out of place as a scream in a library, sliced through the calm. "So, I'm afraid there's been a mistake." LeBron looked up from his tablet, his focus breaking like glass. A flight attendant named Stephanie stood over him, her posture rigid, her smile stretched so tight it looked painful. It was a corporate smile, a mask of forced politeness that barely concealed the condescension simmering just beneath the surface. And beside her, practically attached at the hip, stood the reason for the interruption. Susan Brooks, a woman so draped in diamond she seemed to glitter with malice. Her sneer was a physical thing, a weapon in its own right, and it made it perfectly clear what she thought the mistake was. She believed LeBron was trespassing on sacred ground. Stephanie's voice got louder then, her words becoming a performative announcement for the entire cabin. "This VIP seat is reserved," she declared, her eyes flicking over LeBron's suit as if it were a cheap costume. "We'll need you to move to the back." The words hung in the air, thick, ugly, and suffocating. To the back. It wasn't just a direction. It was a judgment, a relegation steeped in a history of pain and prejudice. The cabin, once a low hum of quiet conversation, fell deathly silent. Every whisper died. Every clinking glass was frozen in midair. Every eye turned towards seat 1A. It was a familiar feeling for LeBron, this sudden, crushing weight of a dozen silent judgments, the hot sting of public humiliation. He could see the other passengers' reactions reflected in the polished cabin walls, a gallery of silent collaborators. A businessman in 2B quickly looked down at his laptop, pretending to be absorbed in a spreadsheet, his cowardice a tangible thing. A young woman across the aisle visibly flinched, her eyes wide with shock, but she said nothing, her potential allyship strangled by the fear of confrontation. An older man in a tweed jacket shook his head slightly, a quiet performance of disapproval that did nothing to change the situation. And then he saw it, the discreet, almost imperceptible tilt of a few phones, their cameras secretly recording, sensing the blood in the water. Their silence wasn't empty. It was an audience, hungry and waiting for the show. But what kind of show were they about to get? LeBron felt the heat rise in his chest, that old, familiar burn of indignation, a fire that had been stoked by a lifetime of slights and insults. But he had learned long ago that anger was a luxury he couldn't afford. Reacting would only confirm their biases. Instead, he met Stephanie's gaze, his own calm and unreadable, a deep, still lake of control. His voice, when he spoke, was steady, carrying the weight of 1,000 similar injustices but betraying none of the fire raging within. "There must be a misunderstanding," he stated simply, holding up his tablet to show the confirmed seat assignment, clear as day in the Apex app, his name and seat number glowing in the dim light. This seat was confirmed this morning. He was giving her an out, a corporate ladder to climb down from her prejudice perch. He was following protocol, playing the game by their rules. Stephanie didn't even glance at the screen. She dismissed his proof, his reality, with a contemptuous wave of her hand, as if swatting away an annoying fly. Her decision had already been made the moment she saw him, and no amount of evidence could change the story she had written in her head. She sided instantly and unconditionally with the sneering woman beside her. The mask of politeness finally dropped, shattering on the floor of the first-class cabin, replaced by a cold, sharp impatience. Her voice was now laced with steel. "We don't make mistakes, sir," she said, her tone implying that he was a mistake that needed to be corrected. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a low, menacing hiss meant only for him, but loud enough for the front rows to hear every venomous word. "Now, if you don't cooperate, we'll have security remove you." The threat hung in the air, a declaration of war. The power dynamic felt absolute. In her world, her uniform gave her all the authority she needed, and his lifetime of achievement meant nothing. As the sound of heavy, purposeful footsteps began to echo from the jet bridge, Stephanie crossed her arms, a smug, triumphant look spreading across her face. She had won. But what she didn't know was that LeBron Carton never played a game he hadn't already won before it even started. The threat was not a suggestion. It was a verdict. As the promise of security guards hung in the tense, silent air of the first-class cabin, another drama was unfolding in the route just behind LeBron. A young woman, maybe 25, had been watching the entire, ugly exchange through the gap in the seats, her stomach twisting into a tight knot of outrage. She saw the condescending smile on Stephanie's face, heard the dismissive tone, and witnessed the casual cruelty of it all. For a moment, she thought about speaking up, about saying something. But what could she say? The fear of being the next target, of being dragged into the conflict, held her in place. But she knew she couldn't do nothing. The silence of the other passengers was deafening, a thick blanket of complicity, and she refused to be a part of it. So, she made a different choice. A silent choice. Discreetly, she slid her phone from her pocket, her thumb expertly swiping to the camera function. She angled it just right, shielding the screen with her hand, and pressed the small, red record button. The lens focused, capturing Stephanie's smug expression and LeBron's infuriatingly calm demeanor. Her phone wasn't a weapon, but it was a witness, a silent, impartial observer that would capture the truth, frame by frame. Just as she steadied her hand, a new figure entered the frame. A man in a crisp pilot's uniform, silver at his temples and an air of unquestionable authority radiating from him like a force field. It was the captain. Summoned by Stephanie, he strode into the cabin not as a mediator, but as an executioner. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't look for evidence. He saw a black man in a tense standoff with his crew, and his mind filled in the rest of the story, a story written by a lifetime of ingrained biases. He walked right up to LeBron, his posture rigid, his face a mask of stern impatience. He looked down at him, not as a valued customer, but as a problem to be solved. "Son," he began, and that one word dripped with so much patronizing condescension it was like a slap in the face. It stripped LeBron of his age, his status, and his dignity. "I don't know what the problem is here, but on my aircraft, my crew's word is final." The captain's voice was calm, but it held the unyielding finality of a judge's gavel. The system was closing ranks. The message was clear: your truth doesn't matter here. LeBron just looked at him. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply held the captain's gaze, and in that silence, a silent battle of wills was fought. But it was a battle LeBron was destined to lose, at least for now. This was the absolute lowest point of his perceived power. He was trapped, surrounded by a system designed to protect itself, a system that saw his very presence as a disruption. The captain, misinterpreting his silence as defiance, gave a sharp, definitive nod. "You will move," he commanded, "or you will be escorted off this plane." The choice was no longer his. Two airport security guards, their faces impassive and their shoulders broad, appeared at the front of the cabin as if on cue. They were just doing their jobs, two cogs in a machine they didn't control. Seeing no other option that wouldn't end in chaos and handcuffs, LeBron made a strategic choice. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a sign of compliance, but it felt like something else entirely. A king conceding a pawn in a much larger game. He stood up slowly, with a grace that seemed to mock the ugliness of the situation. He straightened his tie and smoothed the front of his suit jacket. And then, the chillingly calm smile returned to his lips. It was a smile that didn't belong there. It was unnerving, out of place, the smile of a man who knew a secret that no one else did. And then began the humiliation walk. The narrator's camera follows him as is led down the narrow aisle, the eyes of every single passenger burning into him. He could feel their gazes, a mixture of pity, scorn, and quiet satisfaction. The young woman's phone camera followed him too, its lens capturing the slow, shameful procession out of the sanctuary he had paid to be in. This was his moment of ultimate public defeat. He was being physically removed, his status erased, his dignity left in pieces on the plush first-class carpet. He had lost. He reached the door of the plane, flanked by the two guards, the captain watching with a look of stern approval. He was cast out, but as he took his first step from the carpeted floor of the cabin onto the cold, industrial metal of the jet bridge, something shifted. He didn't look broken or angry. He paused, turning to face the captain one last time, his calm smile still perfectly in place. The confrontation should have been over, but LeBron leaned in slightly, and in the gray emptiness of the jet bridge, he said something. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a plea. It was a lesson, delivered in a voice so quiet and precise that it cut through the air like a surgeon's scalpel, freezing the blood in the captain's veins and wiping the look of authority right off his face. The captain stood frozen on the jet bridge, the confident smirk wiped clean from his face, replaced by a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years: doubt. LeBron hadn't shouted. He hadn't threatened or cursed. He had done something far more terrifying. He had calmly, and with the precision of a master surgeon, dissected the captain's entire world of authority, leaving it exposed and bleeding on the cold, industrial floor. You might want to review FAA Regulation 14 CFR Part 121.580, LeBron had said, his voice barely a whisper against the hum of the nearby engines, a sound that suddenly seemed menacing. It details the final authority of the pilot in command, but it also outlines specific crew compliance duties regarding passenger seating, duties which your flight attendant chose to ignore. He had paused, letting the words sink in before delivering the next blow. You've also, he continued, his eyes holding the captain's, pinning him in place with an unnerving calm, violated 3 separate articles in your own contract of carriage regarding discriminatory practice and passenger verification protocol. He delivered the information not as an angry, wrong passenger, but as a professor giving a lecture or a lawyer laying out an airtight case. There was no emotion, only the cold, hard, and undeniable weight of fact. The captain's mind, usually a calm cockpit of checklists and procedures, was now a vortex of alarm. Disgruntled passengers yell, they curse, they demand a refund or threaten to sue. They don't quote federal aviation regulations from memory with the nonchalance of a man ordering coffee. A seed of cold dread was planted in the captain's gut, a foreign and unwelcome sensation. He tried to dismiss it, to cling to the decades of ingrained authority his uniform provided. But LeBron's words were a corrosive acid, eating away at the foundation of his certainty. For the first time, he considered the horrifying possibility that he hadn't just made a mistake. He had walked straight into a career-ending catastrophe of his own making. Back inside the plane, Stephanie was basking in the warm glow of her victory. She fluffed the pillow on Susan Brooks's newly acquired seat, sharing a quiet, conspiratorial smile with her. She had restored order. She had enforced the unspoken rules of this elite space. She was completely, blissfully unaware that the foundation of her entire career had just cracked on the other side of the door. While she was rearranging pillows, a different kind of justice was being set in motion, a justice that moved at the speed of light. The young woman in the row behind had her phone in her lap, her heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and righteous anger. Her hands were shaking, but her purpose was a steel rod in her spine. She refused to be one of the silent ones, another bystander in a world full of them. She couldn't challenge the captain, but she could bear witness to the world. She opened up social media, attached the crystal-clear video, and began to type. Her words were simple but powerful. Just witnessed a black man with a confirmed first-class ticket get threatened and removed from Apex Air Flight 715 so a white passenger could have his seat. This is disgusting. His crime? Flying while black. She added the hashtag, a digital battle cry that would soon echo across the globe. #flying while black. Then, she tagged the airline directly at Apex Air. With a final, decisive tap on the glowing screen, she hit post. What happens when a single drop of truth falls into the vast ocean of the internet? It doesn't just make a ripple, it creates a tidal wave. In the first 10 seconds, the video had 100 views. A minute later, it was at 5,000, her phone beginning to buzz with notifications. 10 minutes later, it had passed 1 million, her phone now vibrating uncontrollably in her hand. A wild, angry thing. The view count wasn't just a number. It was a gathering storm, a digital army assembling in real time. The comments section became a waterfall of pure, unfiltered outrage from every corner of society. I'm a pilot for a rival airline, and this is a shocking abuse of authority. The captain should lose his license. I've been a platinum member with Apex for 20 years. They just lost my family's business forever. My son is black. This is my worst nightmare every time he travels. Thank you for recording this. The video was shared by a major civil rights activist, then a famous actor, then a news aggregator. Within 20 minutes, the hashtag was the #1 trending topic in the United States. The court of public opinion was in session, and the verdict was unanimous, swift, and brutal. Every corporation with a glass tower and a PR department has a nightmare scenario, a folder on a server labeled Level 1 Crisis. This wasn't it. This was an extinction-level event unfolding live on the internet, and in a sleek corporate headquarters miles away, the first seismic tremors were just beginning to be felt. In a quiet, climate-controlled office at the Apex Air corporate headquarters, a 27-year-old social media manager named Kevin was staring at his screen in abject horror. His Monday morning was supposed to be about posting friendly travel photos and responding to complaints about lost luggage. Suddenly, his monitor had lit up like the control panel of a melting nuclear reactor, a relentless flood of notifications, each one a digital dagger aimed at the heart of the company. He clicked on the tag and the video played. He saw Stephanie's condescending smile. He heard the captain's patronizing voice. He watched the humiliation walk. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pale, waxy sheen of terror. This was not a lost bag. This was a 5-alarm corporate fire, and he was standing at ground zero holding an empty water pistol. With hands that shook so badly he could barely dial, he picked up his phone and called his boss, the director of communications. She saw the video and immediately called the vice president of PR, her voice cracking with panic. The VP, seeing his career and multimillion-dollar stock options flash before his eyes, called the CEO, interrupting his Sunday morning golf game on the 17th hole. The panic shot up the corporate ladder like a lit fuse on a stick of dynamite. "What is happening?" The CEO roared through the speakerphone in a hastily assembled emergency meeting in the main boardroom. A dozen executives in expensive suits scrambled, their faces illuminated by the frantic glow of their laptops, the air thick with the smell of fear and stale coffee. "Who is this man? Find out who he is. Get me the flight manifest for 715 now." The manifest was pulled up on the main screen, a simple list of names that had now become the most important document in the world. They scanned the names. LeBron Carter, Seat 1A. The name meant nothing to them. It was just a name. "Run a background check. Now," the CEO commanded from his golf cart. An executive assistant, a sharp young woman named Alicia, was already on it, her fingers flying across the keyboard. As the search results populated on her screen, her eyes widened. Founder and CEO of Undercover Technologies, a multi-billion-dollar tech giant. Pioneer in AI logistics. Her blood ran cold. She remembered a dry, company-wide memo that had gone out just last week, an announcement so full of corporate jargon that most employees, including herself, had deleted it without reading. The subject line was strategic acquisition and new parent company. Alicia's mind was racing. She pulled up the deleted memo from her trash folder on one screen and the background check on the other. Undercover Technologies, a hostile takeover, the new parent company of Apex Air Holdings. LeBron Carter, CEO. The pieces didn't just click into place. They slammed together with the force of a car crash. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. The world around her seemed to slow down, the panicked shouting of the executives fading into a dull roar. The CEO was still yelling on the speakerphone, his voice tinny with rage. "Does anyone have anything for me?" A dead silence fell over the room as every executive stared at Alicia, who looked like she had just seen a ghost. She stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the polished floor with a sound that seemed deafeningly loud. She swallowed hard, trying to force air into her lungs, trying to find her voice. "Sir," she began, her voice a choked whisper. The CEO, impatient and furious, snapped back. "What is it?" "Alicia, spit it out." She took a deep breath, her eyes locked on the name on her screen, the name of the man they had just thrown off their own plane. She announced the verdict that had just been handed down to every single person in that room, on that flight, in that company. The passenger isn't just a passenger. His name is LeBron Carter. He's the founder of Undercover Technologies. She paused, letting the weight of the name and the company sink in, before delivering the final, devastating line that sealed all of their fates. "And we work for him now." The silence in the Apex Air boardroom was a physical thing, a crushing weight that sucked all the air out of the room, leaving a vacuum of pure terror. The CEO's angry shouting had been cut off mid-syllable, replaced by the dead, empty hum of an open line from his golf cart. "We work for him now." The words echoed in the vacuum, a corporate death sentence delivered by the ghost-white face of a terrified executive assistant. In that glass tower, miles away from the drama, the war was already over. The executives looked at each other, their six-figure suits suddenly feeling like cheap costumes, their faces slack with a horrifying realization that they had lost in a way they couldn't yet comprehend. But on the cold, sterile jet bridge of Flight 715, the soldiers on the ground were still blissfully unaware that their king had not only been checkmated, but the entire board had been flipped over. The captain, still reeling from LeBron's unnerving legal lesson, was trying to piece his authority back together. The security guards shifted their weight, their faces etched with the bored impatience of men who just wanted to finish their shift. They all believed they were in control. They had no idea that they were merely puppets, and their new master was standing right in front of them, about to pull the strings. LeBron showed no fear, no anxiety, no trace of the humiliation he had just endured. He had a lifetime of practice at compartmentalizing his rage, transforming it not into weakness, but into fuel. This was not a moment for anger. It was a moment for precision. He looked at the guards, then at the captain, and with a voice that was pure, calm control, he said, "Gentlemen, if you'll just give me one moment." Before they could object, he slid his own phone from the inner pocket of his suit jacket. It was a sleek, minimalist device, a black monolith of polished glass and steel, cool to the touch. It was not a toy. It was a scepter, the tool he had used to build a global empire from nothing but an idea and an unbreakable will. He tapped the screen once. The person on the other end answered before the first ring could even finish, a testament to the power he wielded. The captain and the guards watched, a mixture of pity and annoyance on their faces. They thought he was making a desperate, last-ditch call to a lawyer, or maybe his boss, to complain about his treatment. They saw a man clinging to the last shreds of his dignity. They thought it was pathetic. LeBron's voice was low, but it cut through the ambient hum of the airport with the intensity of a laser. "This is LeBron Carter," he said, his tone flat and devoid of emotion, the voice he used for closing billion-dollar deals. "We have a code black situation on Apex Flight 715. Initiate the protocol. Ground the plane. Immediately." The words were alien, a language they didn't understand. Code black. Protocol. This wasn't the language of a disgruntled passenger. It was the language of command, of immense, hidden power structures they couldn't begin to imagine. The captain almost scoffed. What a sad, delusional display. He exchanged a look with one of the guards, a silent mockery passing between them that said, "This guy is really losing it." LeBron simply lowered the phone, his face an unreadable mask, and met the captain's gaze with that same chillingly calm smile. The captain thought he was witnessing the final, pathetic act of a man who couldn't accept defeat. He had no idea he was witnessing the first strike of an earthquake that was about to bring his entire world, his career, and his future crashing down around him. He was staring into the eyes of the man who had just become his judge, jury, and executioner. An awkward, tense silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. The security guards took a step forward, their patience finally gone, their job to remove the problem, not to listen to it. And then, a phone rang. The sound was shrill, frantic, and violently out of place in the charged atmosphere. It wasn't LeBron's. It was the captain's. He pulled it from his pocket, his face a mask of annoyance at the interruption. He glanced at the caller ID, and a flicker of confusion crossed his face. It was the CEO. On a Sunday. Strange. He answered with his crisp, professional voice, a voice he had spent 30 years cultivating to project unwavering authority. "Captain speaking." The response from the other end was not a voice. It was a raw, primal scream of terror, so loud and distorted with panic that the security guards flinched. "What have you done?" The sound that came through the phone was the sound of a man watching his entire life burn to the ground, a sound of pure, unadulterated fear. Before the captain could even form a syllable in response, the CEO's shrieking voice continued, a torrent of panicked words tumbling over each other. "Shut up. Don't you say a word. Just listen to me. That man, the passenger you just removed, is LeBron Carter. He's the CEO of Novacor. He owns us. Do you understand me? He owns US. Hand your phone to Mr. Carter right now." If a man's life can be measured in moments, the captain's life ended right there on that jet bridge. The words from the phone were like bullets, each one tearing through his carefully constructed reality. LeBron Carter, CEO. He owns us. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, gray color. His professional mask didn't just crack, it shattered into a million pieces, revealing the terrified, broken man beneath. His arrogance, his authority, his very identity, it all crumbled into dust in the span of a single, horrifying heartbeat. His mind frantically replayed the last 10 minutes. The condescending son, the dismissal of the ticket, the final, arrogant command to move. Each memory was now drenched in a new, sickening horror. His hand, the one holding the phone, began to shake violently. He looked up at LeBron, but he wasn't seeing a passenger anymore. He was seeing something else, something powerful and unknowable, a god or a devil. He wasn't sure which. He stumbled forward, his polished black shoes scuffing on the floor, his legs suddenly weak and clumsy. He held out the phone. It wasn't a request. It was a pathetic offering, a plea for mercy from a man who had shown none himself. The physical transfer of power was absolute and humiliating. LeBron took the phone from the captain's trembling hand, his own expression completely unchanged. The phone, a symbol of the captain's authority just moments ago, was now in LeBron's possession. He was in control. In that single, silent moment, the entire power structure of the universe had inverted. The captain was no longer a captain. He was just a man, standing on the edge of a cliff, about to be judged by the very man he had just condemned. LeBron held the CEO's phone to his ear, but his eyes never left the captain's face, forcing the man to witness his own destruction. His voice, when he spoke, was the calm at the center of the storm, cool, clear, and loud enough for the captain and the two petrified security guards to hear every single world-altering word. He was not just giving orders, he was passing judgment. Your entire flight crew on 715 is to be suspended, effective immediately, pending termination, he stated, each word landing like a hammer blow on the captain's shattered psyche. The plane is grounded for a full internal investigation into its culture and compliance failures. And you, he said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more personal, more venomous, will meet me at this gate in 10 minutes to tender your personal apology. Is that understood? He didn't wait for a long reply, just a choked, pathetic yes, sir from the other end. He then hung up and handed the phone back to the captain's numb, outstretched hand without so much as a glance. The dismissal, the sheer indifference, was more profound and more insulting than any curse word could ever be. Without another word, LeBron turned and started walking back towards the plane. The security guards, their minds struggling to process the cataclysmic shift in power, instinctively parted for him, clearing a path as if for royalty. As he reached the entrance to the cabin, a new, quieter commotion was taking place. A gate agent, her face pale and her movements hurried, was quietly but firmly escorting a stunned, ashen-faced Susan Brooks off the plane. Her diamonds seemed to mock her now, glittering under the harsh fluorescent lights. Their eyes met for a split second. There was no triumph in his gaze, no "I told you so." There was only a calm, quiet finality. She knew. He stepped back into the silent VIP cabin. The atmosphere had changed. It was no longer a sanctuary of the elite. It was a tomb, thick with tension, regret, and fear. Every passenger was frozen, staring at him with a mixture of awe and terror, their faces a gallery of shame. He walked down the aisle, his footsteps the only sound, and stopped directly in front of Stephanie. She was standing by seat 1A, her face a grotesque mask of confusion and dawning horror. She looked like a statue, frozen in the exact moment her world had ended, the condescending smile still faintly etched on her lips. LeBron looked her directly in the eye, and with the same calm, steady voice he had used all along, he delivered the final, cathartic blow. "You were right," he said. "There was a mistake, but it wasn't mine." He then sat down in his seat, 1A, as if nothing had happened, and picked up his tablet, the light from the screen illuminating his impassive face. The justice, swift and brutal, had been served. The flight attendant was suspended. The captain was broken. The passenger who had wanted his seat was gone. The immediate, ugly injustice was corrected, a wound cauterized by the sheer force of his hidden power. The passengers in the cabin let out a collective, shaky breath they didn't realize they'd been holding. But as the silence in the cabin stretched on, a new, more complicated question began to form in the heavy air. Is this where the story ends? Can you cure a sickness that runs this deep just by firing a few people and breaking a few careers? Or was this spectacular victory just the first shot in a much larger, more difficult war for the soul of an entire corporation? The battle for the jet bridge was over, but the war for the soul of Apex Air was just beginning. Back in his seat, LeBron was the quiet center of a universe that had been turned completely upside down. The silence in the first-class cabin was heavy, thick with the unspoken regrets of the passengers who had watched and done nothing. 10 minutes later, as promised, a wave of dark suits and panicked faces appeared at the door of the plane. It was the CEO of Apex Air, the man from the phone, flanked by a half-dozen terrified executives. They looked like men running to the scene of a crash, only to realize they were the ones who had been driving. The CEO, his face pale and slick with sweat, rushed forward, his hands outstretched in a gesture of desperate supplication. He opened his mouth, the first words of a long, groveling, pre-rehearsed apology already on his lips. Mr. Carter, on behalf of the entire Apex Air family, I cannot begin to express how sorry. LeBron didn't even let him finish. He didn't raise his voice. He simply raised a single hand, a quiet gesture of absolute power that stopped the CEO mid-sentence. From his seat, he looked up at the pathetic delegation of leaders, his gaze sweeping over them, dissecting their fear. "Save it," he said, his voice calm and cold. "This isn't about your apologies. I'm not interested in them." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle on them like a physical blow. "This isn't about me. This is about your broken culture. The sickness in this company that allowed this to happen. And it ends today." He stood up then, a quiet, powerful movement that made the executives instinctively take a step back. He gestured towards the jet bridge. "We'll talk in the lounge." They came expecting to apologize for an employee's mistake. They were about to find out they were being put on trial for the sins of their entire company. The private Apex Air Lounge, usually a serene oasis of leather armchairs and complimentary champagne, now felt like a courtroom. The sprawling space, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac, was another symbol of elite status, but the power dynamic had been completely inverted. LeBron was the judge, and the half-dozen executives were the condemned, standing before him, their heads bowed. He didn't sit. He paced slowly before them, a predator in his own territory, while they stood clustered together like frightened sheep. He was no longer the victim of their system. He was the architect of its reckoning. "For years," he began, his voice dangerously quiet, "your company has operated on a culture of discretion, which is just a corporate word for bias. You've allowed a rot to fester, a belief that some customers are more valuable than others based on what they look like. Today, we perform the surgery." He stopped pacing and turned to face them, his eyes like chips of obsidian. He laid out his terms. They were not suggestions. They were commandments. "First," he declared, "the immediate and unconditional termination of Flight Attendant Stephanie and the captain of Flight 715. No severance. No golden parachute. Their records will reflect termination for cause, based on gross misconduct and violation of federal law. This is the punishment." The executives nodded frantically. "Second," he continued, "you will hire the top diversity and inclusion firm in the country, a fame of my choosing, to conduct a complete, mandatory overhaul of your bias and de-escalation training. Top to bottom. From this boardroom to the baggage handlers. This is the re-education." More frantic nodding. "And third," he said, delivering the final term, "you will draft and implement a new, system-wide dignity in the skies policy. It will establish a zero-tolerance clause for any and all forms of discrimination, backed by a clear and transparent process for reporting and accountability. And it will be named in my honor, so that no one ever forgets what happened here today. This is the legacy." He finished speaking and a heavy silence filled the room. The executives looked at him, their faces a mixture of terror and disbelief. This was more than they could have ever imagined. He wasn't just demanding a pound of flesh. He was demanding a complete corporate rebirth. He locked his gaze on the former CEO. "These are not suggestions," he stated, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "They are my terms for allowing Apex Air to continue to exist. Do you agree?" The answer was a pathetic, desperate chorus of "Yes, sir. Of course, Mr. Carter, absolutely." The executives, these titans of industry, scrambled for their phones, their hands shaking as they began to carry out his orders. The scene was a blur of frantic, terrified action. An email flies from a phone to the head of HR. "Action immediate. Terminate employment for." A call is made to the company's top law firm, drafting a new zero-tolerance policy, code-named Carter Initiative. "I need it by morning." On a laptop, a new calendar invitation is sent to the entire company, from the C-suite to the interns. Its subject line stark and uncompromising: mandatory company-wide sensitivity and de-escalation summit. The consequences of LeBron's commands rippled out from that lounge in real time, a digital shockwave rewriting corporate policy. The termination notices for Stephanie and the captain were officially drafted and sent. Their careers ended with the click of a button. The guilty were punished. New rules were being written. On paper, it was a total, unconditional victory. But as LeBron watched these powerful men scramble to save their company, a deeper, more unsettling question lingered. Can you truly change the heart of a corporation with a new policy and a mandatory training seminar? Can you legislate dignity? Or was this just replacing a few broken parts in a machine that was designed, from the very beginning, to fail people who looked like him? In the days that followed the incident on Flight 715, the story ceased to belong to the people who had lived it. It exploded into a national conversation, a modern fable of prejudice and power that played out on a loop on every news channel and social media feed. The video, captured by a silent witness, was now iconic. Stephanie's condescending smile and the captain's patronizing dismissal became symbols of a deeply ingrained systemic bias. But it was LeBron Carter who captured the public's imagination. He was instantly hailed as a hero, but not for the reason you might think. People weren't celebrating his wealth or his ability to command revenge with a single phone call. They were celebrating his strength, his quiet, unshakable dignity in the face of public humiliation. They celebrated the fact that when he was given absolute power, he didn't just seek to punish, he sought to rebuild. He became a symbol of empowerment for every person of color who had ever been followed in a store, passed over for a promotion, or told they simply don't belong. His victory felt like their victory. The world was celebrating a hero and condemning a villain. It was a simple, satisfying story. But what happens to the villain after the story is over? When the cameras turn away and they are left with nothing but the deafening silence and the consequences of their actions. A few days later, a simple, hand-addressed envelope arrived at Novacor headquarters. It wasn't sent by a lawyer or a courier. It was passed through a chain of people until it finally landed on LeBron's desk. Inside was a letter, handwritten on plain stationery. The handwriting was neat, but the pressure of the pen seemed to betray a trembling hand. It was from Stephanie. LeBron read it alone in the quiet of his office, the city lights twinkling below. The letter didn't contain excuses or justifications. It was a raw, painful confession. "Mr. Carter," it began, "I am writing to you not to explain my actions, but to try and understand them myself. I've spent my life believing in a certain kind of order, and I enforced it without question. When I looked at you, I saw your suit, but my prejudice saw something else. I saw a threat to that order." She went on to admit the unspoken pressures of a job. The need to cater to passengers who looked like Mrs. Brooks was an unwritten rule. But that is an explanation, not an excuse for the cruelty I showed you. I failed. I don't deserve my job back, and I don't expect you to understand. I am writing only to ask for your forgiveness. He held in his hands the confession of the woman who had tried to strip him of his dignity in front of a plane full of strangers. He could have thrown it away. He could have ignored it and let her live with the weight of her actions. Vengeance had been served, after all. But as he read her words, he didn't feel triumph or satisfaction. He felt a profound and surprising wave of sadness. He saw not a monster, but a broken person, a product of the very same broken system he was now trying to dismantle. What would you do? The next day, at a press conference packed with the world's media, LeBron walked to a podium flanked by the logos of Novacore and a newly humbled Apex Air. Everyone was expecting a victory lap, a final condemnation of the employees who had wronged him. He began by announcing the details of the new, mandatory training programs and the groundbreaking Dignity in the Skies policy. Then, his tone shifted. He pulled the folded letter from his jacket pocket. "Yesterday," he said, his voice quieting the room, "I received a letter from one of the terminated employees." A murmur went through the crowd. He proceeded to read a portion of the letter, keeping Stephanie's name anonymous, his voice steady and clear. He read the part where she confessed her own prejudice, her own failure. The room was silent. He folded the letter and looked out at the sea of cameras. The easiest thing to do in this situation is to seek revenge, to destroy someone's career and call it justice. But that's not strength. The strongest thing we can do is build a world where revenge is no longer necessary. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. We don't move forward by destroying people. We move forward by fixing the systems that create them. Then, he spoke as if directly to Stephanie herself. To the person who wrote this letter, I accept your apology. Your journey towards understanding is just as important as any policy we can write. By choosing forgiveness, LeBron offered a path toward healing, elevating the narrative from a simple story of justice to a profound message of unity. But in a world so deeply wounded by prejudice, is one man's grace, even a man with all the power in the world, enough to build a permanent legacy? Is it enough to truly change anything? 1 year later, the world has moved on, as it always does. Headlines fade, outrage softens into memory, and viral moments are buried under the endless scroll of new ones. But for a legacy to be real, for it to mean anything more than a trending topic, it can't just live in the memory of a crisis. It has to live in the quiet, mundane, unremarkable moments that follow. It has to be proven not in the heat of a spectacular battle, but in the calm of a lasting, durable peace. On board another Apex A flight from New York to Los Angeles, the first-class cabin looks almost identical. The same plush, cream-colored leather seats that promise an escape from the world. The same soft, warm lighting designed to soothe the powerful and the privileged. The same quiet clinking of crystal glasses. On the surface, nothing has changed. But culture isn't about what you can see. It's about what you feel. And the feeling in this cabin, the very air itself, is different. It's less arrogant, more aware. A young black man in a custom-dyed purple hoodie and a pair of impossibly new sneakers makes his way to his seat. 2B is a young tech founder, flying to LA to close his first round of venture capital funding, a dream made more real by stories like LeBron Carter's. Is wrestling with an oversized carry-on, trying to fit it into the overhead compartment. A few rows back, an older white businessman, the kind of man who has occupied seats like this for 30 years, watches him. A familiar flicker of suspicion, a micro-judgment, hardens his eyes. The scene is set. The ingredients are all there for a repeat of history, an elite space, a passenger who doesn't fit the decades-old stereotype, and the silent, powerful judgment of a bystander. For a tense moment, you can feel the ghost of Flight 715 hanging in the air. A new flight attendant, a young woman with a calm, professional demeanor, notices the struggle. She walks over, and for a split second, the entire cabin holds its breath, conditioned by a story they all now know. But there is no condescension in her eyes, no tight, dismissive smile that feels more like a weapon than a welcome. She doesn't see a problem. She sees a passenger. She offers a genuine smile and says, "Sir, allow me to help you with that. Those can be tricky. We have some extra space in the forward closet if it's more convenient for you." She addresses him with the same effortless respect she had just shown the businessman. She doesn't question his ticket. She doesn't question his right to be there. She sees a passenger who needs assistance, and she provides it, precisely as the first page of the Carter Initiative training manual dictates. This is the dignity in the skies policy in action. It's simple. It's seamless. It's so profoundly normal that it's revolutionary. The young founder, who had instinctively braced himself for confrontation, relaxes, a wave of relief washing over him. The businessman sees the entire interaction, sees the flight attendant professionalism, and the subtle tension in his own shoulders loosens. He turns back to his newspaper, his unconscious bias challenged and quietly defeated. The moment of potential conflict dissolves into a simple, human interaction. This is the legacy, not a dramatic confrontation, but the quiet, unremarkable, and beautiful absence of one. That small, drama-free moment was a microcosm of a much larger and much more difficult transformation. In the year that followed the incident, Apex Air underwent a seismic shift. It wasn't easy. The mandatory, company-wide training sessions, led by the third-party firm LeBron had insisted upon, were fraught with tension. There was resistance, eye-rolling, and uncomfortable silence as employees were forced to confront their own biases in sterile conference rooms. But there were also breakthroughs, moments of dawning understanding, difficult, necessary conversations that slowly began to chip away at the decades of toxic culture. The results began to show, not just in the air, but on the balance sheets. The company's stock, after an initial terrifying dip, didn't just recover, it soared to historic highs. They became the airline of choice for a new generation of diverse business leaders, artists, and travelers who saw the company not for its single, ugly mistake, but for its powerful, public, and authentic response. They had proven, in the most brutally capitalist terms, that dignity is good for business. In a world increasingly demanding corporate accountability, Apex Air had inadvertently become the gold standard. But the ripple effect didn't stop there. The Carter Initiative became a legend in the corporate world, a Harvard Business School case study on how to turn a crisis into a catalyst for profound change. Other airlines, watching Apex's stock price climb and terrified of having their own viral moment, began to proactively adopt similar policies. Their motivations weren't always pure. It was often a decision driven by fear of the stock market, fear of public shame, fear of their own Stephanie lurking on their payroll. But progress, even when motivated by fear, is still progress. One man's humiliation, amplified by a single cell phone video, had forced an entire industry to take a long, hard look in the mirror. The final scene is not in a boardroom or press conference. It's here, at 30,000 feet, where the story began. LeBron Carter is sitting in seat 1A of an Apex Air flight, just as he was a year ago. He isn't reviewing contracts or closing deals. His tablet is put away. He is simply looking out the window, a quiet, contemplative peace on his face as he watches the clouds drift by below. He thinks of the boy in the dusty Houston library, the one who made a silent promise to be judged by the contents of his mind, not the color of his skin. He had achieved that, and in doing so, had discovered a much deeper truth about the nature of power. He had learned that the ultimate power isn't just winning the game. It's having the strength and the vision to rewrite the rules for everyone who comes after you. One man's humiliation became a revolution at 30,000 feet. It was a painful, ugly, and deeply public reminder that prejudice is not just an attitude, it's a system. But it also proved that true power isn't about having the best seat. It's about building a table where everyone belongs. And that's how a single act of prejudice accidentally grounded an entire industry's bigotry. LeBron chose reform over revenge, but not everyone would have made that choice. What would you have done in his shoes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, and you believe these conversations are essential, hit the like button and share it so this message can be heard. To make sure you don't miss the next story that needs to be told, join our movement of voices fighting against injustice. Subscribe, and let's keep telling the stories that matter, because silence is the one luxury none of us can afford.